Hey everybody, your old pal Shawn here. In today's episode, we're going to talk about some deep cultural dynamics and how they work and some major social movements. But before we get started, if you like what we're doing, please like this video, share it with as many people as you think will be interested. Comment, because I want to know what you think. Am I covering topics that you are interested in? Am I off base? Is there something I could correct? Let me know. If you're in a good financial position, please consider checking out our givesendgo.com/SZP because I really want to increase the production quality of these videos and give you a higher and higher service. There's a lot of projects we have in mind. I'm not going to do those until we have a certain standard of quality so I can give you a really excellent product. All right. Now, let's get started. As I mentioned in the introduction video of this podcast, I don't like conflict, okay? I might be inclined to look away if people are arguing in a movie or if someone's being blamed for something in a movie. Like, I do not enjoy conflict. And I can appreciate the fact that everyone's going through battles that we don't know about. I don't want to make life harder for anybody than it has to be. We're already in a world full of betrayal and heartbreak and injury, sickness, pain, death, war, famine. So I don't want to make life more difficult than it needs to be. And I'm very glad that as a society, we became more culturally aware of the pain that people have, different disadvantaged groups, that we have an awareness and a consideration of the inner struggles of others. This is a very important dynamic. For too many generations, we didn't care about one another. And we would say things like, don't speak unless spoken to. Children are best seen and not heard. If you have an opinion, I'll give it. Whole groups would demonize one another based off of gender or race, culture, religion, age, social class. Now we're more sensitive to that, and I think that's a good thing. I think having been through World War I, World War II, and many armed conflicts after that, as media increased and coverage around the world spread, we gained a greater awareness that the same mothers are holding their dead sons on beaches all over the world, that people have the same fears and insecurities, and the United Nations were formed with an idea of enough. We're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to demonize one another because of the color of their skin, because of their religion, because of their garb, the section of the world from which they hail. We're not going to do this anymore. And so there was an attitude of let's work towards greater peace. Now, have we been as successful at that as I'd like? Certainly not. But I think those great calamities have been urging the world to a greater awareness of the value of sensitivity and caring about one another's plight. At the same time, as I had mentioned in the introduction, I think it's wonderful that we have so many mental health services and such recognition and availability now. And it's a beautiful thing. If a friend comes to you in need and they want to tell you what's going on, what they're struggling with, and if you offer them a safe space, it's a beautiful thing if someone is going to a therapist, a psychologist, someone who's trained to help and support them, and if they can go to that person in their vulnerability and truth and honesty and say, hey, here's what I'm living. Can you help me? that's a really beautiful thing. However, outside of those conditions, a safe space does not exist. The world is closer to being a serial killer than a therapist. And we should treat people as such. We should work on making them more robust, helping them to develop a more comprehensive view of the world that can allow them to manage the great challenges of life, because they will face them. There is no way around it. I know we want to protect people from pain, but there is no way we can do that. People with beautiful, open hearts, they'll say things like, oh, we shouldn't use certain words because they could hurt. And this comes from a great intention. Their idea is they're going to shrink the world around people. So they're going to remove words and ideas that are offensive, or speakers. They're going to cancel or censor a deplatform or push away people who could bring about pain in others. And this comes from a beautiful, beautiful thing, awareness. Because so many of us, we've been bullied, or we've been hurt, or we've had loved ones bullied or hurt, or even worse. And we don't want that to happen to anyone else. So we'll quickly identify with the underdogs in these cases, and we'll see them as victims, or we'll see them as people who've been hurt or oppressed. In some cases, absolutely. At the same time, we also have to realize that by trying to shelter them from these things, they become even more vulnerable to them. I've been interested in fitness for many, many years. And while I won't consider myself an expert, I'm going to share with you a couple different philosophies to illustrate my point in a hopefully less controversial way before we get to the more difficult parts of this conversation. There's a certain physical training philosophy that you should only train with the highest and highest of technique in ranges of motion that are very, very safe for you to operate in. The idea is your technique should be a 9 or a 10 out of a 1 to 10. And your pain should always be like a 1 or a 2. Very, very low pain. That doesn't mean low effort, but low discomfort. And no exercise should ever deviate outside of this super safe range. Now, on one hand, that helps people who have the injury concerns stay safer. There's no guarantee of safety. People get hurt in every activity in the world. But it's an idea of safety. And it provides a certain assurance that there won't be wear and tear on the joints beyond the bare minimum that you can't avoid it. All exercises you do should be compensated for with a certain kind of movement, and warmed up for with it, and prepared for with a certain kind of movement, building onto each other. And this all makes a lot of sense. It's a good training philosophy. There's another training philosophy that understands that, well, life is messy, and you're going to move outside of these ranges. And while it's good to have very excellent technique, doing a certain percentage of your training where there's more variability, more instability, perhaps more training gradually, gently, but surely into wider and wider ranges, making those expanded ranges more safe, more controlled. And the idea is not to shrink the range of movement available to the practitioner, but make the practitioner more resilient in a greater and greater range of motion. And I think that that's a good metaphor for what I'm talking about here. I remember I'm not quite sure what year this was. At some point on a MySpace post someone had MySpace. Yeah, we're going back all right. Um, a friend of mine, a good friend, very nice person, said that they were a social justice warrior. And I had never heard this term before. This was early 2000s, maybe touching the 2010s, but I think early 2000s, something like that. And I thought, well, yeah, that's a great thing. And just the words social justice warrior, I haven't heard it in any cultural sense, just this. And I thought, well, yeah, there is injustice, and we want to bring about justice, so we're gonna fight for that and fight for people to have the pay that they should have and the protection that they should have and the representation they should have and all of the rights and laws and that every person is entitled to. So I'm 100% for this. Sometime later, I heard the word woke, and eventually, again, I understood it as okay, it's awareness of injustice. And so that's an amazing thing. We want to be aware of where there's some type of injustice, some type of inequity, some type of disadvantage that's being capitalized on by others. Absolutely. We need to be aware of that. So, again, I thought that was really cool. And then years later, I heard the words Black Lives Matter. And I think the first time I heard it was early 2010s, maybe sometime a little after the Occupy movement. And I said, fuck yeah, they do. A lot of my dearest friends are black. There are names, if I see them pop up on my phone or my messenger, I'm so excited to hear from them. It's like, yeah, man. These people are awesome. So, of course, Black Lives Matter, and you want to be woke, and you want to fight for social justice. Totally get it. It wasn't until years later where I heard some of the context some of these things were put in. And I began to understand, often the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I began to understand that we should be able to talk about difficult issues. A lot of people have very inflammatory definitions of woke, and I tried to come up with one, and I'll present it to you here as I understand it today. The way I look at it is woke is a philosophy and movement that prioritizes the immediate feelings of the individual over all other circumstances and sets of data that could come in conflict with that, and prioritizes people on a scale of perceived disadvantage. And higher perceived disadvantage a person has, the more moral standing, authority, and importance they're given. And the lower the claimed disadvantage is, the lower importance and status that person has. And if someone of a lower standing were to provoke the immediate emotional feelings of a person of higher standing, then they could easily be seen as an oppressor or a hateful bigot. And I understand, because I don't want to make people's days harder. And I don't want to demonize people who, in their hearts, they want to be great. They want to take care of the disadvantaged. And I'm on board. At the same time, there's an old phrase from Nietzsche. I forget the exact words, but it's something like this: those who hunt monsters should be careful not to become monsters themselves. And those who stare into the abyss must be aware that the abyss may stare back into them. And this sounds scary, but let me talk about this from a practical standpoint. Every time there's a tragic, horrific event, like a school shooting, so many people, you hear the rhetoric, you read the comments, you can hear it in the voices of the people. And they say, oh, how I'd like to get my hands on that person or those people. Oh. And the implication is something quite monstrous. You know, sometimes when we're faced with the darkness, our own malice begins to come out. And often in these days, because we prioritize certain people that we identify with, it's so easy to demonize others because, you know, it's not even our fault. It's not even our fault because as a culture, we are taught not to talk about politics or religion. We're told just avoid those controversial subjects. But the thing is, because as a culture, we weren't taught to hear these things and deal with it in a mature way, we never developed a way to. So when something controversial or something we're passionate about is questioned, we identify with it a great deal and we feel attacked. And so we defend ourselves as if we were physically being attacked. And this is a danger that has brought our society to such a dark spot. Many people for years have been concerned about where our society is going. And the answer that many well meaning people have been presenting is deplatform them, cancel them, ban them, censor them, create laws against them, lock them up, shut them up. Don't let them hurt anyone. Because they're trying to shrink the variabilities in the worlds of those they care about and exclude anyone that could harm them or present an idea that could disturb their current set of feelings. Even at the cost of their longer term greater physical safety. or their health or their well-being, because we can't respectfully. Now we've gone so far, it's almost never respectfully, but because we lost the ability to even respectfully engage in sensitive discussions. We'll say things like, trans woman is a woman, no questions. And I already talked about this, but we need to be able to ask those questions. It's crucially important. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to say the wrong thing. The people are going to be misinformed. And if you want to advance the issues that are important to you, then you need to get more supporters. Well, how do you do that? You don't do that by banning them. You don't do that by slandering people who have questions or have a different view or were primed with a different set of media presentations. What you have to do is be cool and know enough about the subject so that when you hear the questions, they're not going to be shocking or impactful to you. And you'll already have an idea of how to answer them. And you can say, oh, I understand you have this concern, but here's why I'm not worried about that. Here's some more information that it sounds like, as far as I can tell, you're not considering. It's by having answers to questions. It's by addressing the fears and insecurities of people that we can stop demonizing one another and pointing across the border and the walls and saying, oh yeah, look at the abominable other, and realize, this is your brother, your sister, this is you from another family with a different set of information and life experiences. It's important to care. It's important to work for the betterment of all people. And we can't do that if we demonize conversation. And we've gotten so far that we can't allow the other side to talk. And so we have some inhuman representation of the other side in our minds. Are there extremes? Are there fringes? Yes. But I promise you that's not the mainstream. And even the fringes can be reached, given the right set of circumstances. Now, let's aim for the mainstream. If you have issues you care about, whether it's the environment or it's immigration, or it's Israel and Palestine, or it's Ukraine, or it's the economy and the inflation and education and health, whatever your issues that you care about, if you want your view to be a dominant and powerful majority one day, so powerful that no politician would ever vote against it, or their careers on the line. If you want to have such a powerful backing, then you have to win over people you don't agree with now. If you want your issue to make progress, you have to make progress in the hearts and minds of the people you're currently slandering. And that's a difficult thing. And you might want to write them off, and you might say, oh, we'll just gain power and change anything. Yeah, and then they gain power back and the pendulum swings even harder in the other direction. Look where that's gotten us. Nowhere any of us want to be. We've arrived in a dark place. And it's because we care. We care so much about other people, other groups, the issues that we hold most dear. and we all think we're on the side of the right. We all think what we're doing is just, that we're the moral authority. But we're so quick to demonize people. We we need to be able to ask questions such as, "Oh, why would a gay black thought leader vote for Donald Trump?" Or why would people in a country that's already had a black president feel like they're oppressed? You need to be able to ask and answer these questions. If we're talking vaccines, you need to be able to answer things like, people on one side might ask, well, why is the inventor of mRNA vaccines against the COVID vaccine? Why is the former head of the CDC against the COVID vaccine? And then you have to say, well, if the COVID vaccine is so dangerous, how come so many people got it and they're fine? And you could talk about the vast history of vaccines and safety and all of these kinds of things. And you have to let the different people talk. And when you hear, oh, there are different leaders in the trans community who have disagreements on hormone therapy, well, we should be able to talk about it. Or have differences of views in transitions and how we deal with that in society. Okay, there are different members of the black community who disagree on what the problems in their community are and what the potential solutions are. Okay, well, we should be able to talk about it. We should be able to say, hey, you're black, you don't like affirmative action. Why? Oh, you're white, you're for this. Why? We need to be able to ask these messy questions and understand that, yes, there are bad actors out there. Yes, there are fringe extreme people. But you have to try and find out, well, what information did you get that gave you this kind of bias? What interview did you watch? What statistics did you hear? What study came up? What fears arose that made you have these concerns? Because we don't like when people we care about are afraid. We have to stop demonizing one another and realize, this is my family. This is my brother, my sister, my very self. Why are they so afraid? What information do they have? I'm not even saying it's the right information. I'm not saying they're correct. I don't know watching this, I don't know what issues are important to you or what side of the fence you sit on those issues. But I am telling you that there are tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of people who at a values level align with you. And yet we're not talking. And yet we're not speaking. We're looking at each other like we're some kind of monsters. Because we're not allowed to have these discussions. Because we avoid them. Because as soon as someone says something we don't like, we strawman their views. We call them names. Instead of answering their concerns. And if you really have an issue you care about, you need to be able to answer their concerns and criticisms. Maybe they don't understand the issue as well as you do. Maybe the information they had is just wrong. They're not evil. There are evil people out there, but that's not a huge percentage. But as we talked about earlier, when you care a great deal, It's when you try and fight the monsters of the world, it's so easy to become one yourself. It's so easy to become a the kind of person that makes the world worse when you only wanted to make it better. There's a certain idea that I used to share, and it works really well at an individual level. Let's take a person who had been a super good person, like a doormat. They're always doing everything for everybody. They let people walk on them. They're bending over backwards to help them. They're sacrificing everything important to them so that others can be happy, so that they can act as some kind of a shield against all that could come in and hurt them. And I understand the sentiment. I know how much you want to protect those you love. I get it. But these people, they often come to hate themselves because they repress their feelings. They shut down the fact that they gave up their hopes for often no recognition, no acknowledgement for others, and they just get spit on and said it's told it's not enough. And often they're very upset with themselves when they see that there's something inside that's angry at those they love. So, given the right framework and situation for a person, don't go trying this without talking to a psychologist or a therapist or a psychiatrist who knows you and your situation well. Ask them if this is right for you. But here's something that I've found often works well at an individual level. A kind of pendulum swing. It's a compensation period where they'll swing in the other direction. They were too far in one extreme, some idealized version of good, which isn't good. It's just low self esteem and insecurity and fears and doubts and dependence and jealousy and a wide variety of painful feelings. But they think that's what a good person does, is self-sacrificing, a martyr, this kind of person. And what works often for many people from that type of dynamic is to compensate. Go through a period of being more selfish, more expressive, say things you wouldn't necessarily say, even if they're a little direct, a little abrasive. I'm not saying abuse people, I'm not saying attack people, but direct about your feelings. Show what you've been hiding inside. Be more selfish. Put yourself as the priority. And I've always found that people who do this after a certain time period, there's a catharsis that happens. There's a healing inside. They feel better. And then, naturally when they hit a certain threshold, they hit equilibrium and they have the best of both worlds. They have the directness and ability to have backbone, but they have the deep caring and the support, and they're more whole individual. One before maybe they were trying to fit themselves into some caricature of what they think they needed to be like to be loved. And they're trying to make themselves fit into that little box or that tiny little framework. However, at a cultural level, this is messy. And the reason it's messy is because the culture is so big. And when one person would try and compensate out, there's always more people getting into the cycle so that the extremes stay extreme. Instead of, getting there and people eventually mature out of it, some might mature out of it, but some people are just getting into that and finding that's the way to go. So then a more extreme mindset, and instead of emotional reactions and pain at a societal level, never really goes away. It just keeps building up, keeping that movement alive instead of settling down like it does for a single person. And this is a dangerous dynamic. And this is part of what happened with our greater cultural awareness and sensitivity. Because, yes, absolutely, everyone should have a voice. And if there's any job that's paying one person more because of their race or gender or color, or culture or any of that, or if there's any law that treats people differently based off of any immutable characteristic, that needs to be changed immediately, 100%. But there's so many people who they made their life about the struggle, about the battle, to try and fight for what's right, to fight for the disadvantaged, the underprivileged too. They can't let the fight go. And they take great joy in demonizing others. And if something tragic were to happen to that group, oh, well, good, we needed it. Good. Everyone's better for that. Yes. And just making those kinds of comments. Culturally, at the time of this recording, not that long ago, there was a CEO of a health insurance company who was killed by a gentleman who was upset, basically, by the fact that people were paying huge costs compared to their income for health insurance, for care for when they need it, and then they need it, and the company is always trying to fuck them out of their money and trying not to pay for the services that they've been expected to pay for. And it's a struggle. And when you're watching loved ones die and be denied medicine or care or surgeries or whatnot, and you could just see how much I'm not endorsing the death of the CEO, but I am saying that there's a lot of repressed pain. And when you have this kind of pain in a culture, in a population, many people can see this type of act and write it off and consider it a good thing because finally someone on our team got struck those guys. Finally, they're afraid and they know they can't just do this. Like there's a lot of this kind of pain. At this point where we're at, people have such wildly different information about the same event. When you see it reported from one outlet to another, it's almost unrecognizable. I would see something about Doge. I don't know when you're going to watch this video. The Department of Department of Governmental Efficiency. It's run by Elon Musk. Right now, he's cutting different jobs and departments and committees and different government services in the name of efficiency. And I look at one outlet and they're saying, "Oh yeah, he's cutting for millions of dollars that were dedicated to turning mice transgender," and you're like, "What the fuck is this?" And then you look at another outlet, and it's like, "Oh no, it wasn't that. He cut people who were in charge of the nuclear launch codes, and he didn't even know that." And these are just so wildly different. This type of reporting is just so wildly different. It makes it hard to understand what's going on. A major thing, though, and the reason I bring this up is because there are people who have heard such different information. I'm not saying it's right, but different information than you have. That what you're doing doesn't make sense. It doesn't make them evil. And you might say, well, they should know better than to follow this particular news outlet. And my question is, why would they think they should know better? I'm generally skeptical about the news, and I'll tell you why. Because these were the same people who sold, now I'm in the US, who sold us the Iraq War and said there were weapons of mass destruction, and we knew exactly where they were, and they had something to do with September 11th. And we know none of that's true. We know zero of that's true. Now, does that mean that there weren't bad guys there? Yeah. But if you rip open any country, rip it apart, you're going to find bad guys. It's like if you're in the woods and you find a log, you're going to find ants crawling. People in dark places will always take advantage of chaos to do dark things. I'm skeptical of the media, and I'll give you a little more information on this. I'm going to use a less controversial subject, hopefully. By now, everyone's heard the infinite reporting and jokes about Catholic priests doing bad things to little kids. And this is a major seller for two reasons. Sex sells, anything about sex gets a lot of attention, and anything that makes people angry gets a lot of attention. But for generations, people were being hurt, and it was being covered up because it could discredit, push people away from religion, discredit the church, take money take money out of their coffers. And sometimes parents would hear the reports of their kids and say, "Don't you dare say that about Father O'Malley because, you're going to go to hell. He's a holy man," because they couldn't accept that. Even if they could, they would say, "Well, it's a small price to pay for all the people he saved or the church saved. So don't embarrass the church." There are different ways people would moralize it. But for so long, people covered it up. And, you'd hear little whispers of, some of the elite taking advantage of people. And you go, nah, that couldn't happen. But knowing what we do now about Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, Jimmy Savile, P. Diddy, allegedly, R. Kelly, Nickelodeon, Disney, etc. And everyone's interested in these stories because sex sells and because rage sells, anger sells. And yet mainstream news hardly reports it. Where if someone did some excellent journalism on this subject, hundreds of millions of views, that person's career would be made. So why aren't the major networks jumping at it? I sure hope that there aren't even more powerful players involved. I sure hope that we found the very, very end of this. But considering it's not being reported everywhere when everyone in the world's interested, I'm a little skeptical. It's not always so easy to just believe what the media says. And I don't have a particular source that I'm recommending that you follow. Like, I wish, oh, follow this channel and they're always right. I have been deeply disappointed by reporting by folks on different sides of the aisle and how much money they get from demonizing the other side. And I particularly don't like it when they misreport things that I've seen with my own eyes. And again, I've seen this kind of thing on both sides, and I've known enough people in my local area who have in some way been covered by things in the paper, and I see how things are misreported for money. It's a sad thing. Why are we going to let such powers divide us from our brothers, our sisters, our extended human family? Why are we going to allow these media forces to push us apart, to cause us to hate one another? Why are we going to allow these massive interests to awaken the worst in us? Because when we care about someone, all who stand on the other side are not human. They do not get to live, or so we think. As soon as we see somebody as the enemy of those we care for, we write them off. And we say that they don't have a say anymore. It doesn't matter if they don't speak. It doesn't matter if they are deplatformed, if they're canceled. It doesn't matter what happens to them. And this is a dynamic that happens all too easily. And it can happen in a blink. For many years now, people have been divided more and more. And it's in the interest of the powers of darkness, I'll say, to keep us divided, to turn brother against brother and sister against sister. Because they make so much money doing it. All you have to do is point towards the fringe of the fringe. The people that you could somehow vaguely say are on the other side. Then you go, see? They're all like that. All of them. And they're coming for you and they're coming for your kids. And we have to stop them. And then we see them as an other. And then we see them as not human. Just as in World War II, the Japanese unit 731 would call their prisoners of war logs and would experiment on them and do horrendous things. How the Nazis often referred to their victims as vermin or insects, dehumanizing them. It happens so easily. And this is the time when we say enough. We will not be divided. We will not fall. We will not buy into the lies of division anymore. My brother, my sister can come to me and explain to me why they think I'm wrong. They could tell me they're afraid. They could tell me they're angry and they're hurting. And I can be big enough to listen to them. I can be big enough to hear their concerns, their fears, their insecurities that they're afraid to show. I'm going to show them it's okay. Because they can trust me. And if they can trust me, they know I'm not coming from an evil place. And eventually that'll open the door to letting me talk to them about what I see. We have to come together. Division is a civilization killer. No house can stand divided. No culture or country can stand divided. Every civilization will fall when the people turn on one another. Now we're too powerful. We can't let that happen. We cannot turn our backs on our wayward siblings and greater family. We have to have the care, the love, the compassion, and the courage enough to be able to come before them and let them ask their messy, sloppy questions and say the things we don't want to hear. Because when they're not talking, that doesn't mean that goes away. It just means it's going to come out in a more destructive manner later. Just as if a couple has a disagreement, but they never talk about it, and it just eats them alive inside. And everything else can be good, but they never talk about that. And eventually it poisons the relationship with feelings of resentment and bitterness. Why then would that be a good idea when tens of millions of people are on the other side? The values of the people on the other side are more similar than we think. But the information they have about the situation, the strategies they think will best serve those values, those can be wildly different. And if you're going to make progress for those issues that are most important to you, to help protect those groups that are most important to you, We have to go over to the enemy camp. We have to break bread. And we have to talk. We are at our best when we walk into the unknown and work towards a brighter future. When we rise with courage and love to stand for our highest principles. And just as we stand for those that we currently want to protect today, we must learn to stand for those and care about and protect those whose hearts are currently standing against ours. Together, we can build a better world. We can head in a better direction. We can do better than every generation before us. Now is our time. And it's up to us to make it happen. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please share this with one or two people. And until next time, rock on, party on. This is Shawn, signing out.